I did mute you. It's coming through your. It's now you just got to switch your sound down. It's coming through your speaker.
Martin, they've no more whiskey left. You were off tonight.
Okay, everybody, can you see the Mishnah on 48a? Let's get you learn something. See the Mishnah on 48a? Shalosh HaSheiros. So can you see it? Everybody got the Mishnah. So we've spoken, there was a Mishnah about houses that people worshipped as Avodah Zarah. Then after that, there was a Mishnah about stones that were hewn or carved out of like a quarry or a rock face. And this Mishnah talks about the Asherah trees. They've come up a few times before. It's a very famous type of Avodah Zarah. It was a special tree that was usually grown and designated for idolatry service. It was associated with a religion, which was also called Asherah. One of the deities, one of the religions or cults that our people found when we came to Canaan originally. When we first arrived after 40 years in the wilderness to, what was it called in those days? Occupied Canaan. So we arrived in Canaan after 40 years in the wilderness, and the Torah tells us that we have to be careful about the various different deities that the people they were serving. And the Torah says in a few places, you shall not serve as the inhabitants of that land. In fact, Hashem actually says that it's because of what they served and the abominable things that they did that I turfed them out and gave you the land instead. And one of them was a group that liked to worship trees, and these trees were called Asherahs. And this Mishnah, the author of the Mishnah, the Tana, comes to clarify that there are three types of Asherah trees. Shalosh Asherahs hain, three types of Asherah trees. The first one is Ilan Shenatoy Mitchila L'Shem Avodas Kechavim. The first one is an Asherah tree that was initially planted for the purpose of Avodah Zarah. That's why they planted the tree, in order to serve it as a deity. Hareizu Asura, says the Tana of the Mishnah, that is a prohibited tree. You may not derive benefit from such a tree. It was initially planted for the purpose of Avodah Zarah. That's why they planted it. And by the way, the commentators on the Gemora, which eventually evolves into actual halacha, explain that what that actually means is if it was Gentiles who planted the Asherah tree for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, then a revocation is actually possible. They can actually revoke the idolatrous status, because we've already learned that Gentiles have the power to revoke the idolatrous status of the idols that they make. But if it was Jews, Rahman al-Islam, if it was Jews, sadly, that had designated these trees as Avodah Zarah trees from the time that they were planted, then they are irredeemable. That's it. You can never, ever benefit from such trees. That's the first category that the Mishnah mentions. The second category is a tree that was not initially planted for that purpose, but people came along and made adjustments on the tree in order to designate it that way. And what did they do customarily? They would carve out certain things on the tree. They would cut off a piece of the trunk in order to give it a different shape, or make a new piece grow in a different direction from where they cut. Or they would trim branches. Gidai, they would cut a piece of the main trunk of the tree. Ufisloi is if they would trim some of the branches. And when doing this trimming or cutting, they had in mind that from now onwards, this tree is going to be used for the deity of Asherah as Avodah Zarah. So Gidai or Pisl Shem Avodas Kechavim, they cut into the trunk, or they prune branches to make the tree continue growing for Avodas Kechavim. Then, says the Tanner of the Mishnah, very similar to what we said about the house and stones previously. The pattern follows very similar. Take off the new part that started to grow from the time that they designated it to Avodah Zarah, and then the rest will be okay. V'hechlef, it grew a new part. So noitel masha hechlef. If you had your camera there and you took a picture of the tree, now you take another picture to see which parts have grown. And whatever the additional is that grew from the time that the tree was designated for Avodah Zarah, you can take away that additional part. And once that has been removed, the rest of the tree's okay. The third thing is that they took a tree and there's foliage on the tree. So now you've got some form of shade, some area of protection under the tree. So here what they did is they went and said, this is a perfect place for an outdoor idol, for an outdoor statue that we're going to serve. And they went and they designated that shade area that the tree was giving as an area of Avodah Zarah, and put some type of tzelem, some type of we call it, some type of idol under it. If they put idolatry under the tree, v'notla, and he took it away, then the tree again becomes permitted. Because when you take it away, you show that the designated status is no longer the designated status. So again, the Tana gave us three categories. A tree that was planted initially for Avodah Zarah, that's generally not redeemable. A tree that was trimmed or cut into for new growth and then dedicated to Avodah Zarah, we said that you could cut away the new part and the old part is back to user-friendly, to usable. And the third is using the shade or the how would you call it, the cover that the tree provides in order to house an idol. If you take the idol away, then that tree is again okay. That is the Mishnah. The Gemora quotes a comment that seems to have been made on this Mishnah. Amar Devei Rabbi Yanai, the sages of Rabbi Yanai's school, of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai taught, they commented concerning this Mishnah. Devei is like a yeshiva or a school. So Amar Devei Rabbi Yanai, the school of Rabbi Yanai taught, we're talking over here, they're making an observation that when we talk about cutting or pruning in order to improve the tree or designate the new growth for Avodah Zarah, we're talking about a very dedicated kind of action on the tree. And what it means is that if they either, hivrich is a process where they would sink a branch into the ground to make it grow anew, or hirkiv, or they would graft the branch and cause it to grow into another tree or into another place. So there was two methods that the people would use for trees or vines. One of them was that they would take a soft, I guess it would be a softer branch or shoot, and push it towards the ground, sink it into the ground. Now what then happens is it starts to take roots inside there. And once it has taken root, they could cut it off from the mother tree and you have a whole new piece, you have a whole new section. So when they would take the tree and create a new section by directing branches into the ground, that's called hivrich, sinking branches into the ground.
We do it today.
Yeah, and hirkiv is when they actually graft, they cut, how would you call it, an incision in a place in the tree, and then they go and they stick a shoot inside there so that it's a little bit like making a transplant. For whatever reason, they want it to grow in a certain kind of way, so they actually do a transplant, like a little bit like when the doctors move the veins around or move things around in a medical procedure. They move a piece of the tree and go and install it in another part of the tree. So the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai said that when we talk in the Mishnah of doing something significant to the tree in order to now dedicate it for Avodah Zarah, we're talking about these very serious moves. We're not talking about a light garden prune or a minor cut. The gardener said, let me just shave it a little bit on this side or that side, or shape it up. We're talking about a major action that goes to the, if we could use the pun, the root of the tree's essence. It goes to the essence of what the tree is. you're extending it, you're grafting it. That's what we mean when we say that you make an action which designates the tree to Avodah Zarah. Now, it would seem the assumption is that according to the school of Rabbi Yanai, if it was a lighter version, like let's say they hadn't actually grafted or sunk a vine into the ground, a light pruning or cutting would not be considered designating the tree to Avodah Zarah. But the Gemora questions this and says, "Why not get your pislet none?" But look at the Mishnah. We learned in the Mishnah, look at the words, he pruned or he lopped a part of the trunk. The Mishnah didn't seem to talk about such a specialized, significant move like grafting and sinking. So why is Rabbi Yanai and his school commenting in this sort of way? So the Gemara explained, when we learned this comment of Rabbi Yanai, Le'inyan bittul itmar. It was with reference to the revocation that we learned this. In other words, Rabbi Yanai was not saying that a lighter version of pruning is not enough to designate the tree. It is enough to designate the tree. Anything that you do in order to say that this tree is now being used for Avodah Zarah. But he was talking the other way around. He was saying that when it comes to revoking the status of the tree as Avodah Zarah, when the Gentile wants, for instance, maybe he wants to sell his property to a Jew, and the Jew is complaining, "I don't want to buy it because you've got a tree over there that I can't use because you've got an avodah Zarah tree." There's two chairs right here.
Two chairs here. Two chairs up there.
How's it so? So let's say, for instance, the Gentile wants to sell a piece of his property, and the Jew is complaining, "Look, I don't want to because you've got a tree there, and the tree is designated to Avodah Zarah. Now I'm going to buy a field, and I've got a tree in the middle of it, a significant tree that I can't enjoy, I can't use." So he says, "Don't worry, I'm going to revoke the Avodah Zarah status of the tree." You know, the guy says, "I know that I can do that. I can revoke the status of Avodah Zarah of that tree."
But how does the guy know about?
We've told him. You want to do a good sale, you got to tell him what he can do for you. So anyway, don't worry, when it comes to a few bob, everybody knows everything. Yeah. So
What's the glasses? No, they were whiskey glasses.
Oh,
Yeah, to Zev. I'll take it.
Zev is that way.
Seven.
Steve glasses over there. So anyways, but when we learned the Rabbi Yanai, the statement of Rabbi Yanai, the Inyan Bittul Itmar, we learned it concerning the revocation of the idolatrous status of the tree. The Afal Gav, the Chiddush, the novelty of what they said is that even though the Hevrich v'hirkiv b'gufay shel Ilan, that he grafted and he sank a vine or a branch from the body of the tree, Kinatal, if he takes off what is added, Masha Hechlif, that which was added, Shapri Domi, it's okay. And the reason this was necessary, the Mahu, the Tamer, because I might have thought, I might have assumed, given the Hivrich v'hirkiv b'gufa shel Ilan, because the person made a very significant change to the body of the tree. He didn't do a light pruning, he did a very, very significant change to the body of the tree. Maybe it's like a tree that was planted initially for Avodah Zarah. And in fact, the entire tree becomes prohibited forever, irreversibly, irredeemably. So the Gemora says to Mashmalan, so that is the novelty. We learn otherwise. We learn that that's not the case. In other words, just want to say that again in simpler words, what the Gemara is saying is as follows. We had said that if you plant a tree initially for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, that's a problem. It's irreversible. You've dedicated it to Avodah Zarah. So somebody might think that when it comes to grafting and what was the other thing? What did we call it? Connecting and grafting and creating shoots from the tree itself. Somebody might think that that's tantamount to replanting altogether. That's not addition.
But if you take
That's
just
it,
a
yeah.
question, if you
Yeah.
take a branch and
Yeah.
you take it and you plant it elsewhere, and it regrows from the
But right
tree,
now, it's still connected to the original tree. You haven't separated it.
no. You're not making
you're
a plant.
doing, yeah.
You're promulgating another tree.
Yeah.
So is that other tree that you're promulgating now, and it could be a different area, also avoid the Zorah?
If that was the purpose of you taking it, then you
No, you're just taking it, you want to promulgate another tree, but not avoid the Zorah.
Then it will be okay. The problem is if you take a branch,
but you've taken it from a tree that
was planted originally for Avodah Zarah, then you've got a problem because you shouldn't be benefiting from a tree that was planted originally.
Yeah.
But if the tree was not planted originally for Avodah Zarah, then somebody came along and made an addition, designating the addition to Avodah Zarah. What we're saying is the addition is the problem, not the
original tree.
So the original would be okay. That is the novelty, the chiddush, the novelty idea of this particular Mishnah. So that when somebody goes, in other words, the nutshell of this whole story is that when somebody dedicates an additional thing, we've been saying again and again that the additional thing is the issue, not the original situation. And if you can peel off or dismantle the addition, we said it with renovations of a temple or an idol. Now we're saying it with regard to the tree. If the tree was initially planted for Avodah Zarah, again, clarifying, if the tree was initially planted for Avodah Zarah, then you've got a problem. That's why it was planted. And especially if it was a Jew who did it, now you're really in trouble. There's no reverse. That tree has to just be destroyed. Sorry? If the Jew designates the tree as Avodah Zarah from the time that it's planted, there's no reversal. In other words, a guy can, because if the guy designated it, the guy can. I don't think the guy can revoke what the Jew does. No. I think once a Jew does it, it's irredeemable. But the guy can revoke what the guy does. But what he's saying over here is that you might have thought that a very sophisticated grafting exercise where you've actually gotten involved with a piece of the tree in such a way that you're causing roots to come out in another place. I mean, I once saw technology, Ephraim, you were saying they still do it today. I once saw technology, I think it's actually an Israeli technology where they peel a piece of the branch up in the sky and they wrap it up with like soil or whatever. And the next thing you've got roots that are growing in the air. And now they can take that branch off and move that somewhere else and put the piece and replant the piece with the roots. The roots are now up at the top, and you can actually turn it around and stick the roots in the ground. Why are there roots at the top? Because by wrapping it up in a certain kind of soil and damp and whatever, and bandaging it up, you simulate in the ground. So the tree thinks that it's at that point there's ground, so it starts to produce roots as if it's in the ground. And now you've got that whole branch and it becomes another tree. It's quite fascinating. But what he's saying over here is even an intense job on the tree, which would be tantamount to planting a tree, somebody might say, hold on a second, that's not an adjustment. That's already considered a whole new planting. And we learned that if it's a new planting, then the Avodah Zarah is irredeemable. So what Rabbi Yanai's yeshiva wanted to teach is it doesn't matter what the action of the tree was. It could be grafting, it could be sinking, it could be highly sophisticated and significant, or it could be just a basic gardener's trim. This tree's looking a bit wild, I'm going to trim it down a bit. But the fact that he did an adjustment and had in mind that from this adjustment onwards, we are going to utilize this tree for Avodah Zarah, then you can reverse back to the point of adjustment. It's like if you go the wrong way, you drive in the wrong way, you can go back to the intersection where you got lost, and you can say, okay, I found my way back to the point where I drove off course. I'm now back on course. So it's that kind of thing. When there's adjustments, you can remove the adjustments. You can go back to the point where you started making the adjustments, and you can say, okay, at this point, I'm going to do tshuva and use the rest of the tree. The Gemora then quotes Shmuel. Shmuel makes a comment which again, talks to the same subject. We've been talking about a tree that was planted for Avodah Zarah, a tree that was designated later. Shmuel talks about a person who goes and bows down to a tree. So in other words, it would seem that initially the tree was not considered idolatrous, but came along an idolater, and he said, that looks like a nice tree to serve. You know, they would make themselves gods out of everything. And he walks up to with his siddur, or whatever the equivalent is. And he bows down to the tree and he serves it. What happens? He's now designated the tree for Avodah Zarah, but it wasn't like that its whole life. It's from now onwards. So Shmuel commented,
Isn't it only for him for now?
yeah. No, he's designated it.
He's designated for himself.
For himself, but from now on. But it's still, even though it's for himself, he's still using it for Avodah Zarah, which could make it a problem for you and I. Avodah Zarah is not only whether we use
it. We use it for shade if we don't know.
No, if we know that it has been designated as Avodah Zarah, okay, that's a whole different section. How do we know? If we don't know, we don't know. But let's say we do know. We live in the land of Canaan, and the Canaanite next door worships trees. You worship God, and he worships trees. That's what the Torah told us. You're going to come to the land of Canaan, and you're going to find people that do funny things. Ma'avir b'noyu b'toy b'aish, and the moilach, and all kinds of funny stuff. And one of the funnies that they do is they worship trees. And in the discussion of this particular Gemora, there are different kinds of trees. There are trees that were initially planted for this purpose, and there are trees that later on were designated. Shmuel now talks about a situation where there was no pruning or grafting. He just took a tree that was already there in the garden, and he said, you know, this guy could be how'd you call it? This could be my God. I mean, I don't want to say anything, but I've got a lovely tree as I come out. It must be like, I don't know, like a Brazilian pepper tree. I think they call it that. Like it grows those little peppercorns that are they're a pinkish color. They're called Brazilian peppercorns. It's a giant tree. Like, yeah. As you come in, I mean, I don't think anybody would ever want to take that down. It's the trunk is half the stable. Yeah, huge. So I'm saying is, once upon a time, people saw such beauties. They thought, like, you know, this could be a force. This could be a... So Shmuel says, what happens if a person goes up and worships the tree, bows down to it? So what he rules is that everything that grows from then onwards is the problem. What was around at the time that he bowed down, you could reverse to. You could eventually peel off everything that grew from then onwards. The issue is from now onwards. Omar Shmuel taught, if somebody bows down to a tree, the additionals are prohibited. He didn't do anything. It's not like in the Mishnah where we said he pruned or he cut or he designed or he grafted. He just bowed down to it. But because he bowed down to it, the designation, according to Shmuel, starts effectively now. So it doesn't affect as badly the tree until now, but it does affect the tree from now. So now the Gemara asks a question. Hold on a second, Shmuel. You're saying that because he bowed down to the tree, he's now ruled out anything that grows from now onwards. So if you buy the property and you know that it was 5 years ago, and you can figure out what grew in the last 5 years, you've got to cut away what grew in the last 5 years to get the tree back to where it was before he started serving it. But, so we're saying that's not redeemable. But...
it's a natural process. Why would they?
Yeah.
You can't stop it.
Sorry?
Even though it's been designated by some schmutz.
Yeah.
You can't stop the branches.
You can't stop the branches. Yeah. Massive Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar asks a question. Look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, if somebody pruned and adjusted the tree as a gardener would, an arbor, what do they call them? The tree people. The arborers would do to it, the hechlif, and then it grew extra parts. If he takes away what grew, that seems to indicate if he did actions to cause more tree to grow, that's when you have to remove what grew. But if he didn't do any actions, he shouldn't have to remove anything. In other words, it seems that what Shmuel's comment is, the Gemara saying, is not in accordance with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that if you pruned or designed or added, you did actions. You didn't just serve it. You did natural actions to the tree. And because of that, you've got to remove what came about from your actions. It would seem that's why you have to remove it. Because when you designated it to Avodah Zarah, you got busy there. You called in the tree expert and you said, I want the branches to grow that way. So he showed you how to pull, I don't know, maybe you put some brackets that would make it grow in that direction. You put in proper action over there. But it would seem the way the Mishnah talks about the action, that if there's no action, that doesn't affect the rest of the tree. If all the person does is pray, then he just has to revoke the Avodah Zarah status of the tree, and the tree should be fine. Why should it be a problem if he didn't make any concerted effort to make the tree grow in any kind of way? So just because he bowed down to it on Sunday morning, so from this morning onwards, everything that grows is a problem. It doesn't seem to tie up with what we said in the Mishnah. And the Gemora says, in fact, you're right, it doesn't tie up, but it's because there are different opinions. So the Gemora says, Amalach Shmuel will tell you, Homani Rabbanan hi. Whose opinion is the opinion of the Mishnah? The Mishnah opinion is the opinion of the rabbis. Shmuel the Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Shmuel's opinion is the opinion like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. The Amar Ilan Shenatoila Vaseif Avadi Asur, who said that a tree that was planted and served later on is prohibited. There was an argument, a dispute between a Tana Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and the sages. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda said that it doesn't matter if initially the tree was not planted to be served as Avodah Zarah. The fact that later on they came and designated it for Avodah Zarah, that's the problem. It's prohibited. In other words, he wasn't fussed about whether it was originally planted for that purpose, whether somebody came along later and said, nice tree, let's use it for Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda said, same thing. Planted for idolatry, use it for idolatry, same thing. But the rabbi said, no, if it was planted for idolatry, that's one thing. If it was only used later for idolatry, not necessarily does that affect everything going backwards and forwards. We've got room, we've got slack. If that came afterwards, then we've got room. We can say what came about afterwards. What about what was there from before? Maybe the trunk's okay, the original branches are okay. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is be aware that there's two opinions with regard to a tree that was planted for Avodah Zarah. There is an opinion stricter, like Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, who is stricter and does not differentiate whether it was right away that it was designated or later that it was designated. You serve it, you write it off. That's it. The rabbis differentiated between whether it was originally planted for that purpose or served later. And Shmuel takes the stricter opinion of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, and that's why Shmuel says you bow down to the tree, now you've ruined it, because you turned it into Avodah Zarah, and you've ruined it. That doesn't tie up with the rabbis who say, hold on a second, you might not have ruined it. Let's see what can be done. What grew? What didn't grow? What was there before? So I think that's where we'll cut for now, because it's already 9:30. We can chat, but I think inside, that's where we'll...
Shit about the tree.
Yeah.
Like a pot that you made it milky, flakey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sholem,
Yeah.
Sholem,
How's it
good day.
Yeah,
you,
no,
man?
Baruch Hashem. We had some
Just like
technology bumps at the beginning, but we sorted them out. Yeah.
Lovely, man. Brilliant, man. Well, listen, it's good. It's a beautiful show.
Yeah.
I'm glad I quit.
Thanks, Rob. Rob, thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you. Les, you can
It's just
switch
like,
it.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that.
and just like Benji.
How it's interesting.
It was his birthday this week. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
I was at his birthday.
This had a few days ago was his birthday.
Today.
Oh, wow, Les, Mazel Tov. We just heard that it was your birthday.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you. Okay.
When is your birthday?
No, it was in November. It was on the 7th last week. But it's all good.
7th of November.
Okay. All the best. Be well.
What is your Jewish birthday?
My Pashat is Lech Lecha.
Sorry, oh, Lech Lecha.
Lech Lecha, yeah.
No,
That's my bar mitzvah.
the camera's
Wow.
giving trouble. Arnold wants to see you, but
No,
the
I
camera's.
just want to say hello to him.
But the cameras, for whatever reason,